have low turnover. Why? Because you want to, turnover is really connected to the quality and the cost of training. It's very, very critical. All right, so let's have a look at some of the things we found in the interview study, survey study. As you know, when you first contract with a Chinese supplier, you may qualify. You want to just double check, do they qualify or not to be an approved supplier to me? Okay, and so what do they look at for the qualification process? Well, they look for visits, production efficiency. These are what their major customer looks for when we ask the suppliers. Quality, service, delivery, financial standing, technology. So which is the most important here? Quality is certainly come now very important, and delivery. Is that different when the customer comes from different countries? Yes, it is different. It is very different. And so let me give you an example. If the large customer is from USA, technology, very, very important. Much more important than if the customer is coming from Europe. Okay? What about production efficiency, which is associated with cost? The European customer put more emphasis on cost than the USA customer. Okay? And quality is still very high, but you see that there's differences when the customers come from different countries. There are differences. And I would say to the Chinese supplier, if you want to move up value chain, technology value chain, you want to get a USA customer rather than a Europe customer. That's one of the things, one of the takeaways we get from that. What about performance measurement importance? See, after you get the supplier on your books, that is, they become your approved supplier. Now you've got to realise that phone I just passed around has 150 or 200 components in it. So it's not unusual to have 500 suppliers for that. Like HGC, they have 1,000 suppliers on their books. Okay? Because for every component you want at least 2 options. Why? You want flexibility. You need that flexibility. You don't want to have a hold up. Okay? So, and I'll give you a real example, and this is a public example. Remember, it was, I think, September, October last year when HTC released its Evo phone in the US, and it was basically sold out, and they had a bottleneck in their production. What was the bottleneck? They didn't have enough LCM modules. What's an LCM module? That is the liquid crystal module that you touch, the touch screen. Their major supplier was Samsung. Okay, they only had one supplier. So they had to go to Sony to fill up that extra demand that they needed to fill to keep the production running. So Australia having 2 suppliers for all their components is really a norm in the industry. So once you get these suppliers on your books, then the next decision is, well, how much orders do we give to one and how much to another? Do we give 100% to one all the time? What will happen to the one that just gets 0 all the time? What do you think would happen? If you 2 are my suppliers and I give 100% to one but not 0 to another, what will happen? The one that gets 0.
It's going to find a new supply, new business, partner.
Yeah, it will look for
new markets.
It will look for some other buyer.
Yeah.
And then when you need them, oh, we're not ready, sorry, or we don't have capacity.
Yeah.
So what buyers will do, they'll give, okay, we don't like you, but we'll give you 20–25% just to keep you warm. And it's called keeping the supplier warm. Okay? And so what we're looking at in this study is what is causing this purchase order percentage difference. And we're currently working with HGC on that to understand how they did the allocations. But on a bigger front with 1,000, it really gets down to what importance the customer puts on the measurement. And so we looked at the performance measurement importance. This is importance by the customer. And so we asked them, your largest customer, when they're deciding whether to purchase from you, what do they consider to be most important? Okay, technology, cost, quality, delivery, service. Notice quality is very important here. Remember right at the start I said don't emphasise price? This is one of the reasons. Even the big customers don't emphasise price. Okay? So is that different between customers from different countries? Well, let's have a look at the USA. USA, technology, very high compared to Europe. It's the highest. Yep. Now you've got to realise that this is not just a survey, like this is face-to-face interviews, so we have very high confidence in the reliability of the responses we're getting. Okay. And It's very interesting that USA places a great emphasis on delivery, okay, and less on cost. Okay. Other Asia, so Japan, Korea, and China. Notice Japan, Korea, very high on cost when deciding whether to order from one supplier versus another. So we've got these interesting trends coming out, and when we talk to Chinese suppliers about which customer they should deal with, well, we can learn something about whether the customer comes from USA or Europe, and whether it fits into their strategy. So not all customers are the same, that's what we're finding out. So the other thing that Chinese suppliers should do is get their customers to explicitly share their performance with them. That is, get the customers to tell the supplier, how am I doing? How am I doing? And we ask the supplier, does your customer explicitly share performance with you? Do they sit down with you and say, well, on A, B and C, you're not doing very well. Do you need help in this area? We can send an engineer across to help you improve. And here you're doing very, very well. And so what we find is that 32% say no, okay? 26% annually and 42% more often. So it's not clear in the industry. And so we want to learn about, do those suppliers that really get that sharing of performance, do they improve faster than those suppliers that actually don't get that performance feedback? And so how does that feedback happen? Evaluation report, face-to-face meeting, factory visit, assessment form, email. So there are many different ways of giving that feedback. All right, if I don't share performance, then what is the strongest signal to the supplier? Here's an easy question. If I don't share performance with you, what's the biggest signal I give you each time I order from you? And I say, oh, remember the price last month? We want it 5% cheaper now. So what's the signal I'm giving to you?
Just money,
price.
nothing else.
Price, exactly. And then you start you're giving that signal to the supplier, all you care about is price. So what's the supplier going to care about? The price. And do all those other things that I talked about right at the start. And so this is why, even though you want to emphasise on price, but if you actually share more on the other dimensions of performance, you can actually balance that imbalance. And I think that's very important in the relationship. Sharing performance measurement. And that's no, yes, Annalie. All right, let's move on to how the supplier's own system, how accurate their own performance measurement system is. So think about it, right? So you're supplying electronics to a customer, and they have their own likes and dislikes and what they want to emphasise and the importance of performance measurement, TDQSC, technology, delivery, cost, quality and service, right? But then the supplier can also have its own systems that give them feedback on those 5 areas. Okay. All right, so then we ask these suppliers, well, you know those 5 areas. Yes, we know those 5 areas. Okay, so which areas are you measuring most accurately? Which areas are you giving feedback on most accurately? Not from the customer, but your own systems. Okay? And so that's what we meant by measurement accuracy. You can see where we're going with this, don't you? See, if we're going to produce a variable called the gap, that is the gap between what they're measuring accurately and what the customer thinks most important. If that gap is larger, then you would expect performance to be worse than if that gap is narrower with respect to the largest customer. So that's what we're doing ultimately. So if we have accurate measurement, then we manage costs, improve efficiently, innovate and learn. So here's the systems they have in place, and some of they've got Chinese systems here, KingG, Superdata software, ERP, Excel, a lot of them using Excel. And here's the accuracy. A lot of them are measuring quality very accurately, costs very accurately, but not so much on service or technology. All right, so is that different from customers, if they have customers from the US or not? Those that have customers from the US, notice that they're measuring technology much more accurately than if they have customers from Europe. That may become the emphasis that the US customer is putting on. What we want to know here now is then we want to compute a gap. Okay? So the first step was we're asking the customer what do they put most importance on, all right? And then we find that USA customers put a lot of importance on technology, European customers a bit more on the cost and the quality. The second step was, what are you measuring most accurately? Okay? Yourself, your own systems. What reports are you getting each week? And some of them, we ask them, do you know on average what your delivery on time was? What percentage delivery on time in the last month? Oh, we don't know that. We have a rough idea. Sometimes we're 1 day late, sometimes we're 2 days late. Well, then that's not very accurate. Whereas some other suppliers would say, oh, yes, 97% on time in the last month. So the system is giving them more accurate feedback. Okay? And so you would have more confidence if you're dealing with that supplier, if they have those systems in place. Because they don't have to rely on you keeping on phoning them all the time, say, where's that delivery coming, when's it coming? Okay? So we construct a measurement gap, all right? So is that gap, and we find that the importance of measurement, the blue, and the accuracy of measurement is red, and then we construct in a gap, which is the difference between each. And so we find that that gap is the narrowest for European customers. It's very high for other Asia and Chinese customers. And it may be because they don't communicate as much in a formal way. Whereas the USA and US customers give much more clearer feedback. And this is an initial analysis of what we're doing. But it's really important, right from the start, remember what I said, try to understand and emphasise with the supplier, what is on their mind? What is on their mind? One takeaway I can give you is help them with their system. Not necessarily what they're making, but help them with their reporting or management system. Is there some way that you can help them improve? Not just for you, but improve for all their customers. And so I'll give you another example, like Coles. They have 30 suppliers that they manage just out of Shanghai in the textiles. And they wanted to reduce their delivery time, from order, initial product design order to final delivery. Normally it was 80 days, and that's too long in the fashion industry. So they wanted to cut it down to 40 days. So what do? They work with their suppliers to integrate their ERP system with the suppliers. So they're helping the suppliers with the systems, not just demanding, we want to cut the delivery time in half, otherwise you find another customer. So we've got to think win-win situation. I think in the management systems area is a great opportunity where you can offer something, no matter what product, whether you're exporting or importing from China. Communicating, that would help in the communication. So obviously they want accurate forecasts, but we ask the suppliers, most of their customers are not providing accurate forecasts. Right, they're always ordering less than 80% than what they promise. Okay? And that's basically being dishonest to the supplier. You do that too many times and they won't believe your future orders. Okay? All right? And so there's some examples of performance measurement accurate. See, the extent that actual order quantity equals the planned forecast quantity. And so we're trying to understand, do they have more accurate performance measurement when their major customer is more honest? They're more honest if they're meeting more than 80% of what they promised, right? If it's less than 80%, they're not probably less honest. Okay? So if they're more honest, what we find is that their accuracy of measuring quality is higher, the accuracy of measuring delivery is higher. If they're less honest, what do they care about? They're caring more about cost. You see that? Right at the start, what I say, if you don't talk about anything else and talk about price all the time, that's all that the supplier's going to care about. So it's interesting, some of the results are starting to come out in what their own systems are giving them feedback on. And finally, developing trust. All of you know, and some of you are going to China, and part of the whole purpose of going to China is to just continue that development of trust. And it's an ongoing thing. So what we ask the suppliers is, in the last 3 years, did your trust improve in the customer? Did they trust less, trust more, or the same as before? Okay, 51% trust more, 13% less, and 36% same as before. This is we've just got a few, we're still developing this, but some of the reasons why they had negative responses to the trust was defaulting payment, lack of communication, market disorder, and so there are a lot of factors I'm talking about. There's a breakdown in the trust. And so there's some quotations here. But I just want to move on now to the final part, just the factory audit, because this is something that a lot of importers from China don't really see the value on. And until you see what a factory audit looks like, you really won't see the value in it. And people just think, oh, it's insurance. Yeah, let's take a chance. Okay? So I can show you very briefly. I've got a factory audit example here, and I don't work for this company, but they're really happy to just show me what a factory audit looks like. This is asiainspection.com. Have any of you seen a factory audit before? So this is just what it looks like. So here's a TV set. LCD is 22-inch, small one. Okay, and it's very important the inspection report takes place before the goods are shipped out of the factory, not after. Not after they arrive in Australia. It's too late. And before you pay the money. Generally you pay 30% first when you're making your order. And some people say, why do I have to give them 30%? Well, they need to buy the materials. The supplier needs to employ labour. You've got to give them something. And it's part of your commitment to the order too. But the other 70% you need to wait until you pass the factory audit. And so we can look at this factory audit, and it's very, very formal. I won't go through the whole 32 pages, but I'll just show you a few parts of, they talk, here are the people that did the audit. It took 1 day. How much does it cost? About $300 US for a day for one person. If there's 2 people, then that's $600 US. And that can save you a lot of hassle, especially if you've got a $15,000 or $20,000 container load of electronic goods. Less than $1,000 for the audit is definitely a good investment. And so this is a normal thing that happens, and so the auditor would come and look at the packed goods, and they'll get a sample of these goods and open them, and they will test drop them and do anything that you ask them to do. Because you, as a buyer, you need to be aware of what are all the things that could go wrong in the product that you're buying from China. What are all the things that could go wrong? Well, it may get dropped in transit, or when it arrives and you plug it in, it may not work. What else can go wrong? It may have the wrong colour. Okay? Or customs may hold it up when they inspect it in Melbourne or Sydney because it doesn't have the required disclosure of electronic standards or ROHS standards and things like that. So there are many things that can go wrong. And so the audit is all about just making sure that this happens. And so Larry and I, we study accounting and we know all about the financial audit. And we think, okay, that's the most important thing. But the actual factory audit is very important too. And so that's the unit there. And so they'll go through and take photos, even check that the colour that you say that the TV should be is that colour. Okay? And there's a lot of other things they do. I like the drop test. I think let me just flick through the page. And then looking at the actual dimensions. Is it exactly, is it 21.5 inch in a certain way? The logo size, okay? Is the logo exactly how it should be? So they check every little thing. And so, and even all of these parts here, all of these disclosures, your goods will be held up at customs if they're not appropriate, if they're not in place. Energy rating, that's important now, and other barcodes at the back of the unit. They check everything. They open the carton. The thing that we don't always pay attention to is the drop test, because everything may check out, but when they 12, 13, 14, here we go. So they do the drop test. They have to drop it 10 drops from the correct height based on carton weight as defined. So you drop it on the face 6 times, you drop it on 3 edges and 1 corner, and see how many times it gets damaged. And so they'll do a drop test, because you've got to think of the shipping container, you don't know what happens between China and here. And we forget about these things when we're shipping items. And so it did down 20 pieces. You can see the results of dropping the drop test. And so they all passed. And so just briefly, that's a factory audit and what a factory audit looks like. So part of what I was talking about today is I just want to impress upon you that we want to think more about what is going through the mind of the supplier. I think one thing that's starting to come out very clearly from my study is that they need a lot of help, not in how they make things, but equally in how they manage things. And I think we have so much knowledge about systems and management and making things transparent and how we use computers for that. We can actually help the suppliers, and that could be something you can contribute to in the relationship, whether it's export or import from China. I think the last, and just going to the last PowerPoint slide, and take you back to the start. And so right from the start I said, okay, pricing should be the last thing you should think of. And when we look at the major customer of these suppliers, yes, most of them do not think of the price first. But when the customers do not communicate with the suppliers, it's interesting that the suppliers measure very accurately their pricing. Okay? So you've got to work with suppliers to help them develop the other non-price areas of their operations. Market size and piggyback, that's a tip I don't know if I have time for, but when you go to a supplier, it's very important that you may give the impression that, well, look, we have a test market in Australia, but ultimately we want to supply to USA, about 300 million, 10, 15, 20 times the size of Australia. And then you give the supplier hope. You give the supplier hope that, look, this is just a starting point. Your small sample you're ordering for Australia is just a starting point, and they're more likely to give you a better price on a small sample than if you didn't tell them that ultimately we want to move to US. Or if you just say Australia is the limit, then they may not give you as a good price on a small sample. So the Chinese are best at negotiating. They're best at pricing. You can't beat them on that. But you need to give them the impression that you want to work with them for long term. You want to work with them for long term. And that goes for importing or exporting between the two. The other strategy you can take is the piggyback, and that is you can find, is importing from China, you find another large retailer that's importing, you go to their suppliers and ask them, look, you're doing a run of 100,000 for them. If and when you are doing that next, is it possible that you can run 10,000 for me? Okay. Now for branded goods, they may not be allowed to, they may not be under their agreement with their other retailer, customer, but you never know, it depends on the type of goods you're working with. Piggybacking is a strategy that a lot of importers work on. Okay. And I think last time I presented at the Trobe here, last year, I gave the example of the QQ car, where the manufacturer of the QQ car, that's the Chinese version, they went to the supplier of the axles to GM and said, oh, you're doing a run of 100,000, how about you run the factory for 20% longer and give us the extra axles at marginal cost. And that's what happened. That's why they were able to make this QQ car for half the price of the GM. And the only reason that GM or Volkswagen, my friend, found out about it was that the tooling, part of the tooling was whenever you make an axle, it actually stamped the part number on the axle. You know, so you can identify it came from this supplier. And so they were able to trace back and find that the supplier actually did this, because they pulled apart the QQ car and found these axles with part numbers on them. Okay. So that's an example of a piggyback to the greatest, beyond what the laws would really normally require. But there are other instances where it can work in a legal way. Ultimately, you have to visit China. ultimately you have to see what's going on and develop a relationship or friendship. If you look at the transaction from that angle, then it's more likely that it will foster over time. If you do not visit, one thing that comes very, very clear, you very, very quickly come out of date with what is happening up there. For example, maybe the wine prices are changing that you don't know about. Or maybe there's a new market from a new product from Chile that's come onto the market you don't know about. The market in China is changing very, very fast. And the visits can help you keep up to date with the market, and they'll help you work the relationship with the supplier. Quality inspection and payment, I've definitely emphasised that tonight. And with the factory audit, shipping arrangement, customs, this is more, I won't go into that, but this is something for another talk. So let me just finish there. Just want to, I guess it's time for a few questions. And just want to thank you for your patience in listening.
Alright, so does anyone have a question? I've got a couple, but Alex.
In regards to your study, how do you measure trust? And, one person's value of trust. Trust is, how do you measure trust in your study? Because I can't explain myself properly, but it's not something that has a, you can't put a number to it, accurate number to it. It doesn't have accuracy. It's arbitrary in both the interviewee and the interviewer. And I'm just wondering how you're measuring trust. And the second part, there's another part of that question is, perhaps you can explain on the Chinese trust is very different to, let's talk Australian trust.
Yes.
It's very different. So are you reading the Chinese trust there, or are you reading, what trust are you reading when you, or are you investigating there? You're obviously investigating the Chinese trust.
Yeah, I think two very good questions. I think we're looking at from a relative point of view, we're trying to group the Chinese suppliers into those that have developed good trust with their major customer and those that haven't. How we're measuring it, there's two ways. So one way I showed you was how is whatever you define as trust, how has that changed in the last 3 years? Has it got worse? Has it got better? Has it stayed the same? And I think you're right, I'm very sceptical about how do you actually manage trust. And I'm not too concerned about whether we're measuring trust or not, as much as I'm interested in whether the relationship is stronger or weaker. I'm more interested in the direction the relationship's going.
Yeah.
Because what we do in the interview, in an open-ended question, we ask that question. If trust has improved or worse, then we ask, why is there a change? So we would just want to understand in their own words what has happened. And so we've tried to have it partly open-ended. And the other thing that we've done, and this came out from the work we've done with HTC, is we tried to think about it from the point of view how the buyer described to us. Because ultimately, when you get into a supply relationship, you develop expectations for what levels the orders will be over time. And the other thing you develop definitely is it's cost down, cost down, cost down. But you also expect that if you're meeting all that performance criteria, not just cost, but on the technology, the quality and delivery, and you're doing all that, you may expect that you'll get more orders in the future. You know, that things will expand, things get bigger, 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 right? And so we asked them this question, okay, from a scale of 50% to 150%, last 3 years, do you think you got more or less orders than what you expected? So we tried to make it very practical rather than, do you trust the customer? And so we've measured it in 2 different ways. Yeah. But no, I'm sceptical about what we're measuring. I'm more interested in which side are they on. Yeah, which side is the relationship? Has it got stronger? Has it got weaker? We're measuring many other things I didn't go into, like, you know, very importantly measure how's your performance been in the last 3 years. You know, what are your sales growth and things like that. But that's how we've tried to tackle that. Your question about the Chinese trust,
I'll
Yes.
throw the word face in there as well, because Chinese thing
Yes.
of face, Chinese face is.
I think it's very important from a practical point of view. From the research point of view, we're more looking at the relative difference between the different suppliers. So once we have 1,000 in our bag, we can group them into those where trust actually weakened over time and those where it's strengthened, and look at different ways that the customer communicated. I think that's one thing. Okay. Practically,